Hello, my darlings. I'm going to move you ever so slightly so that I'm more centered. There we go. Hello, my beauties. So, welcome back to The Gentleman Psychic. Welcome back to Story Time. I am so thrilled to have you. Make certain to hit the like and subscribe button. Ring that notification bell to be updated on videos like this. I appreciate you for being here. And my goodness, today I feel younger today than I was yesterday. So a little bit about that. I took a hot cocoa bath. I know, really curious. I'm so proud about this. I love it. I had this urge today. I take meditation baths, spiritually cleansing meditation baths, pretty regularly, about 2 or 3 times a week, and I love them. Well, today I was going through my kitchen and I thought, what would I like to put in my bath? And I put, the standard ingredients: milk and honey and salt and vanilla and lavender and oatmeal and cucumber. And I went, I need something else. I need something else. I need something else. So I put cocoa in my bath, and I've got to tell you, it was fabulous. Then I learned, of course, putting cocoa in your bath can detoxify your body, and you get antioxidants. It can lower your cholesterol. It's really quite amazing. I love it. I cannot tell you enough how much I love a cocoa bath. Hello, Tinker. Hello. So today we get to continue reading The Doctor and the Devil. And I'm enjoying this book. It's old, but I love it. It's 1891, I think? I can't remember. It is, 1894. So just a little after the invention of the Ouija board. So we left off, my beauties, on chapter number 4. And without further hesitation, I present to you The Doctor and the Devil. I made up my mind this time that I had been doing pretty fairly well as a dive impresario for my clerical employer. In fact, I still flatter myself that I whirled him from the pinnacle of the church leader to the depths of the criminal New York at a pace never taken by any other man. The Doctor in Chinatown. Our next night of devil chasing had for its early scenic effect the vicinity of Mott, Pell and Doyer Street, and the labyrinth of adjacent streets that make up the Chinese quarters of New York. We changed our costume for this tour a little. That is, the Doctor raked his whiskers out, and I left Irving behind to get his constitution toned up for another later pull. Prior to starting out, I had arranged to have Li Bing, a Chinese interpreter, who has a cousin who to Chinatown is what Delmonico is to Swagger, New York, help us about a bit. As recent years, I have forgotten my Chinese and cannot speak the language as fluently as I could once. The Chinese Delmonico's is situated at number 11 Mott Street. You pass up a pair of stairs into a large square room with deep windows overlooking Mott Street. The walls were papered in that quaint kind of tea chest style, with impossible Chinamen standing without any apparent perspective. Several big round tables stood in the room. At one of them sat Li Bing. He, by the way, spoke excellent English. He's about 5 feet in height and is yellow-skinned and really attractive looking. He wore traditional Chinese clothing. "This is the friend I want to show you," I said to Bing. "He is interested in the habits of Chinamen living in New York." Well, he says he speaks very good English, but he is using racial slurs of sort of pidgin English, and I'm, for the sake of posterity, going to say it in proper English. "Very good, sir," replied Bing. "Well, you don't eat the Chinese dinner before we start." "Can we go to it?" I queried of the Doctor. "Rats," he replied interrogatively. I was thunderstruck. To hear the clergyman talk what sounded like slang took me off my mental feet. I guess I looked my astonishment for Dr. Parkhurst hastily told me that he did not mean the word in slang sense, but referred to a dish supposedly a popular Chinese one. I then explained that we could not get the rats in this Chinese restaurant, but something far better. Our first course was boiled rice. It really was delicious. The restaurant was scrupulously clean. In fact, that is the beauty of the entire Chinese Quarter. Around us, smooth-shaven, pig-tailed waiters and slippers without heels, which flopped as they walked about, made it a picture of the Orient in this great city of New World. They served us with the rice heaped in a quaint bowl of Chinese make, and then laid a couple of long, thin, but rounded chopsticks in front of us. Now a chopstick is the hardest thing in the world to use. They are about 10 inches long, flattened at one end. You are supposed to hold one stick between two middle fingers, then you hold the other between the index finger and the middle finger of the right hand. Thus, you have a sort of pair of pliers. By working the thumb as a rudder, for instance, you get a small portion of rice grasped between the flattened end and the chopsticks. Then, with graceful ease, swing of the arm, you deposit the rice in your mouth. Dr. Parkhurst got along very nicely with his chopsticks and his rice until he tried to find his mouth. Then he missed his mark by a foot and deposited his rice in his shirt bosom. "Looks easy, hey?" he said. "But it isn't, I find." But after a little, we both managed to do pretty well with chopsticks. In fact, the doctor soon became quite an expert and asked for a pair to take home with him, a request which was immediately granted. We then were served with bits of chicken pressed in the forms of ducks, cats, and dogs. This was followed by sugar-preserved Chinese nuts, pork soup, sun-dried flounderies, and a little glass of Chinese whiskey made of Chinese rice, an aromatic and fiery dram that did not cause a murmur against its strength from the doctor. His throat was spirit-proof, he whispered after drinking 5-cent whiskey. We then, led by Li Bing, paid a call to Joss House at number 16 Mott Street. The basement of this house was then and is now occupied as Chinese resort. On the second story is another Chinese restaurant, and on the top floor, the Joss House, a place gaudy with hideous-looking statues supposed to be worthy of worship. This Joss House is called the Zhonghua Gong Shou Temple, and here the merchants and the gamblers worship at number 20 Mott Street. 4 doors away is Quanggun Temple, where all the Chinese laundrymen worship. As we passed into the home of Zhong War Gong, I suppose that is his name for short, Tyler or Sexton made the doctor pay 50 cents to see the interior of this temple. It was amusing to see a good Presbyterian money vanish into the pouch of Confucius. The temple was gaudy with Chinese decorations. We paused before the shrine of Joss and looked upon his shriveled, uncouth face, and then we left him and started to take a peep at a Chinese opium joint. "It has been said that there are 30,000 men and women in New York," remarked the doctor, "who are slaves to the opium habit. I am quite anxious to see for myself how the Chinamen use the drug." "Don't you want to hit a pipe?" I asked, a trifle maliciously. Dr. Parkhurst replied that he did not think it necessary for him to go further into vice than to gaze at it, and dashed my hopes of initiating him into the mysteries of dope to the ground. An opium joint. Li Bing led the way to half-tumbled-down building in Doyer Street, where after we had stumbled along a dark hallway, we gained admittance to an inner room, after he muttered what was possibly a password to tall Chinaman who had answered his knock. The room was in semi-darkness, and when our eyes became accustomed to the gloom, I saw we were in a room about 30 by 60 feet in dimensions. The room was quite well fitted up. On the floor, which was uncarpeted, were a couple of dozen rugs and pillows. I noticed that each pillow was as white as the falling snow. Here and there were cots, also rug-covered, with pillows upon them. But what struck Dr. Parkhurst the most was the absolute silence in the room. We stood perfectly still, and there was absolutely no noise. Do you know what is meant by no sound? It means appalling silence. Silence that you can feel. Silence that wraps itself around you until you want to shout, scream, yell, do anything to make a noise. It was the silence of the stupor that opium brings in its wake. At last, Dr. Parkhurst moved and broke the spell. A cloud of acrid blue smoke hung about us and made our eyes smart. Through its feathery sheets, we could see a dozen forms all stretched out upon the rugs in careless abandon. They were in the thrall of the opium demon. In the immediate foreground of this strange picture lay a startling group. One was a Chinaman, flat on his back. His pale copper skin was thrown into quaint relief by a dark-colored rug on which he lay. On his smooth-shaven face was a smile. His half-open eyes were lusterless, but he was happy as any king, for he lay drowned in sensual sloth of terrible narcotic that takes the sense in its grasp and with iron hand dulls it. Pillared between her head on the Chinaman's shoulder was a white woman. She was young, black-haired, and quite preposing. She too was in an opium stupor. On the other side of her lay a Chinese lad, not more than 8 years of age, I should say. He too was drowned in the fumes of the drug. The trio were all one family, I learned. The Chinaman is the head of the Chinawoman mercantile house, and the woman is his white wife. The lad was their child, and the family was enjoying an evening of pleasure, just as you would take your wife and boy to the theatre. A Chinaman, just back to his pleasant family gathering, was freely getting his opium jag. He was smoking from one of those long, queer-looking pipes used in burning the sticky brown black dope, and was inhaling the intoxicating smoke with the pleasure you and I would take in a glass of rare old wine. Nearby an American lay. He too was a dope fiend, but the funniest sight of all was a fat woman, a freak from a Bowery museum, who lay on her tremendous back, her 300 pounds of flesh just tingling with the ecstasy of the drug. As soon as the doctor had seen all he wished of the place, we left it. The doctor was very anxious to be the possessor of a complete layout for smoking the drug lamp, yen hop toy and all. I promised to get him one. I would like next, said Dr. Parkhurst, as we halted in the shadow of Dwyer Street after leaving the joint, to see a specimen of Chinese gambling. We peeped into a room where there were 15 or 20 Chinamen playing fan-tan. The room was in a tenement, in the rear of a high block, a few doors from Mott Street on Pell Street, except that it shows how all races are filled with a desire to make money without adequate labor, said the doctor, as we issued from a dark alleyway leading to the lair of the Chinese tiger. I did not see much that interests me there, the doctor, as we left Chinatown, summed up the feeling I had regarding our experience in it cognitely. He said that the Chinese kept their vices restricted to themselves, something that no other race did in cosmopolitan New York. For this reason, Chinatown was better than he had imagined, he said. I am now going to take you to Italy, I said to Dr. Parkhurst, as we shook hands with Bi Ling and walked down Pell Street toward the Bowery. We have just left China, you know. A sketch from Chinese life. The street was filled with women and men, and the doctor looked curiously at the women, for they were all white. The men, he noticed too, were all Chinamen. I don't understand this, remarked the doctor. Who are all of these women? Are they common women? They don't seem to speak to us as we pass, the way that they did in Catherine Street. I told the doctor that these women were companions of Chinamen living in nearby tenements. They were their wives, some of them regularly and legally married. In other cases, they were not legally wedded to their mates. I wish I could talk to one of them and find out something of their previous history, suggested the doctor. Oh, that's easy, I said. Come on in, I'll introduce you. I led the doctor into the saloon of ex-roundsman Schuyler West. For many years, a trusted police officer of the Metropolitan Force at the corner of Pell Street and the Bowery. We went into the rough private room of the place, a mere box where you had to stand up to get your drink, and I ordered beer for the doctor and whiskey for myself. The doctor tackled his glass, which held pretty nearly a quart, in a thirsty way, and after he had put away half of it, began talking with a really pretty young woman, who was buying a pail of beer when we entered the place. She was about 20 years of age, tall, well-formed. She was well-dressed in blue tea gown and had a little scarf of dark blue yarn thrown over her head. In her ears were a pair of diamond earrings worth probably about $100. She was not at all averse to talking to the doctor when he had accosted her, and she made no bones of telling us that her name was Mrs. Lee Chung, and that her husband was a Chinese gambler. I am a Western girl, she said, and was betrayed by the man I was engaged to about 5 years ago. I came to New York and began a life in the Tenderloin, which I suppose was no different from any other life led there by a woman of half the world. But I couldn't stand it. It was too tough for me, so I got to smoking opium. Then I got to be chronic pipe hitter, as the call salves of the opium drug. That brought me down to Chinatown, and here I met my man. He treats me well, he gives me all the money I want, doesn't care whether I smoke dope or not, and is never jealous. I live twice as well as I did when I was in the Tenderloin district. I tell you, I'd rather be living with the Chinaman, as the Sixth Warders call, they used a racial slur, the Sixth Warders call Chinaman, than to be a woman of the town in New York City any day. The doctor, in commenting upon these words as we continued our journey, remarked that it was fearful commentary upon the condition surrounding the social evil in the Tenderloin district, as the 19th Police Precinct of New York is known when a woman would rather live with a Chinaman than be a belle in its giddy whirl. Ward detectives, Farrington and Liston, of the 6th Police Precinct, stood in the corner of Dover's and Pell Streets. As we passed, I knew them both, and they hailed me. Dr. Parkhurst held down his head and hurried by them, but I stopped and shook hands with them. "What are you doing down here, Charlie?" asked Farrington. "Why, I've been slumming party all along," I replied. "Why didn't you come to the station house before starting out?" returned one of the detectives. "Don't you know Parkhurst has been raising high... You ought to have seen us about this matter before running around here." How the doctor laughed when I told him of his conversation. We then dropped into Jim Lavelle's and Assemblyman Mike Callahan's saloons, for the purpose of allowing the doctor to see the specimens of typical Bowery gin mills. In the latter resort, I had arranged with Giuseppe Dongioni, an Italian interpreter, to take us about the Italian quarters of the city. We had to await his arrival for a few moments, which Dr. Parkhurst passed in watching a game of 15-ball pool played by 3 young Bowery fakers in a table in a rear room of the saloon. Chapter 5. We hurried eventually to Mulberry Bend, that crooked turn in Mulberry Street, one of the most foul-plagued spots in the city. It is here one finds the blackest and most abject of human misery. I think that one could ransack the crowded parts of the cities of the whole world and not find much state of affairs. Italian life in Mulberry Street. The street is narrow, so narrow that in portions of it you can almost stand in its center, and your outstretched fingertips will touch the grimy buildings on each side of you. All the buildings are rickety low, dirty, and hideous in their second-hand style of architecture. They are filled from cellar to roof with people. Every inch of room is used by a tenant. Even the halls are used nightly by sleeping places. as sleeping places. As we passed along the street, our progress was very difficult. There was absolutely no place, no spot, no inch that was not occupied by man, woman, or child, leaden-eyed, pale-faced men wildly talking and gesticulating in the patios of all Italy. Made part of the mass, haggard, dirty, and uncomely women paced the narrow way. Babies, mere bundles of rags and dirt, lay upon the filthy pavement, sprawled out in infant helplessness. Half-clad girls in bitter March air shivered with cold. The crowd moved and swirled like human cataract hither and thither, with a babble of sound and bewildering to the ear. The pavements were slippery with garbage and filth. The air was one awful wave of pollution, and as we passed along, the smell became more tolerable, but we continued our journey. More intolerable, but we continued our journey. Our guide threaded his way by pushcarts, peanut stands, banana vendors, wagons, and by dint and insinuating shoulder pressed a pathway for us through the crowd. In front of number 39 Mulberry Street, he halted. Then he led the way down an alley that ran along the side of the building, dark and dangerous looking, which seemed to be all the steps and crooked turns until he disappeared, it seemed to me, into the bowels of the earth. I was glad to learn, however, a second later that Doninghi had only walked down 3 steps to reach basement door. I assisted Dr. Parkhurst down the steps, and then we all passed into the foulest spot, so far as dirt is concerned, that we had yet visited. The doctor visits a stale beer dive. We found ourselves in a cellar about 25 by 45 feet in dimensions. The dingy hole and dirt floor, a bench ran round 3 sides of the beams that made the foundations for the tenement house above, as well as walls for the cellar. Along the unbenched part at the resort was a plain board counter, which answered for a bar. Seated on the dirt floor, 4 men were playing cards. They were Italians from Calabria, swaggering brigands with gold rings in their ears, ready to cut your throat for a shilling. On the benches sat swarthy ruffians from Lombardy, scowling at our intrusion. The spawn of the criminal world of all of Italy hated representatives of free America instinctively, it seemed. Here and there sat a woman. I would not have believed that they were women had I not looked twice at them. They were all from 40 to 65 years of age, distorted beings whose lives had been steady progress from gilded vice to the lowest haunts of depravity. Poor souls. They had no home but their stale beer dive. They were nearly naked, and perchance, if they staggered out into the streets, they were immediately arrested as vagrants. For the police never allow the poor creatures the right to walk on the pavements of New York. They're too poor, too vile to be protected. So the foul harpies were compelled to live day and night in that noisome, filthy cellar. The proprietor of the place, a low-browed Italian named Pietro Falvelli, was busy serving his customers. God save the mark. A can of beer was sold for 2 cents. The can was once used to hold tomatoes, and the beer was the vilest brew you could imagine. It was the drippings left in barrels by Bowery saloon keepers, the leavings of glass of Avenue dive keepers, the floating scum of 1,000 saloons all over town, but for a mere pittance or begged by Falvelli and then sold to his debased patrons. Whiskey in this hell-hole cost 2 cents a glass. The glass was really an earthen cup, filched from some garbage barrel, and the fluid it contained was so indescribably vile that I shall not try to describe it, except to say that 5-cent whiskey is nectar to that sold in the stale beer dive. A horrible fight for drinks. I ordered 3 cans of stale beer at 2 cents per can, and I also asked the ladies in the place to drink with us. The way they filled up the bar was startling on account of the haste with which the invitation was accepted. One of the gruesome creatures, in her enthusiasm, ran up to the doctor and tried to embrace him. You'll greet me again, won't you, pretty? She said with a horrible grin, which showed her red, scaly, toothless gums. No, he won't, yelled a second vile crone with a horrible oath. He'll buy me another drink first. Hardly had she spoken when the first crone grasped her by the throat. In that moment, the 2 vile creatures were swaying back and forth in fierce combat for the favor of Dr. Parkhurst. The doctor backed away from them in dismay. I was a little rattled myself because the women were yelling, and was so much noise that I was afraid at any moment a big policeman might cart us off to the nearest police precinct, thereby suddenly ending our tour. I grabbed the doctor by the arm just as quickly as I could and hurried him out of the place, leaving the harpies fighting and tearing each other with their talon-like hands. The doctor's face was white when we finally reached Mulberry Street. That was a narrow escape, said the doctor. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible. I had no idea such place could exist in civilized city. Death and disease are stamped all over this section of town. Oh, what a misgoverned city. Little water, my darlings. Chapter 6. There's been great battle waged by the Society for the Prevention of Crime in the 11th Police Precinct. The district in question is bounded by the north side of the Division Street, east side of Bowery, south side of the Houston Street, and the west side of Suffolk Street. It is a precinct in which crime is open, flaring and blatant, and has not changed much since the doctor and I visited it. There is not a block in the precinct which is not infested by a disorderly house connected with licensed saloons, cigar stores masquerading as such, but really houses of ill fame, cider mills of the same character, gambling rooms, policey and crap games, farzo banks. Everything okay?
Yeah, they're complaining that my keyboard is too loud, and I'm like, he's not wearing his mic tonight. I'm sorry.
I'm not wearing my microphone because I was charging the phone. Sorry, darlings. Because I could start. Would you like me to start wearing my microphone now? I can send my lovely.
Go get it.
She'll go get it. I think my phone is charged well enough. We'll start this chapter once again. There we go. I'm going to get the microphone. I'll plug it in so that you can hear me and not hear the clicks on the keyboard. Is that good? Well, thank you, Tinker. She's got it right here, so I think it'll be better sound anyway. But I moved that. There we go. Beautiful, magnificent. And then I'm just going to plug this in right here.
Yes, apparently my typing is too loud for Nye.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll do this right here, and then we'll do this right here like that. Now, you can hear me? Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Is this better? Can you hear me now? You're funny. Nah, you're funny. Well, while I'm waiting, if you can hear me, let me know. I'm going to drink some more water. I sound so close, it's uncomfortable. Well, okay, that's good. I can move my microphone down a little. Maybe that's a little better. Maybe. Okay, so we'll start chapter 6 again. Chapter 6. There's been a great battle waged by the Society for the Prevention of Crime in the 11th Police Precinct. The district in question is bounded by the north side of Division Street, east side of the Bowery, south side of Houston Street, and the west side of Suffolk Street. It is the precinct in which crime is open, flaring and blatant, and has not changed much since the doctor and I visited it. There is not a block in the precinct which is not infested by a disorderly house connected with licensed saloons, cigar stores masquerading as such, but really houses of ill fame, cider mills of the same character, gambling rooms, policy and crap games, faro banks, coffee house dives, and houses of assignation without number. Irving accompanied us on this expedition, and as we were simply going to visit the vicious and not the unspeakably vile, no disguise other than a common business suit of clothes of non-clerical cut was assumed by the doctor. Irving and I were similarly attired, and after meeting at the foot of the 3rd Avenue elevated station in Chatham Square, we directed our steps to the Bowery. A Bowery concert hall. At number 27 Bowery was situated the Windsor Concert Hall. Its exterior was glittering with light, while a big burly man stood in the wide open doorway and hoarsely invited people to enter. "Walk in, gentlemen," he shouted. "Walk in. No charge at all, gentlemen. Walk in." The gutters to the Bowery, and the sidewalk too, were cluttered by a signboard on which was posted a lithograph of popular singer on the comic opera stage who never, I am confident, sang in this Bowery concert hall. "There is a violation of the law," remarked the doctor as he pointed at the signboard. "The corruption laws against obstructing the street are certainly being flagrantly violated." "If the law is violated no worse than that," I exclaimed, "tell me later." I can easily believe you," he replied, "but we will see what we can do shortly to enforce these laws." When we entered the Windsor, we saw stretching away before us a big hall easily 35 feet by 100 in dimensions. A green blind screen ran across the entrance end of the hall, so that people in the street could not see anything going on inside. The left of the hall proper was devoted to a small, short bar, behind which stood a bartender with "Tough Bloke" written all over him. In the extreme upper end of the hall was a good-sized stage. It had no furniture save a curtain with a badly painted woodland scene upon it. There was a door leading from the stage door, and the seriocomic singers and painted brazen women of the town, who were the actresses of the place, were in habit of singing a song on the platform, and then passing down to try their blandishments on the patrons of the dive. Dr. Parkhurst, Irving, and I sat down at a table, one of dozens in the hall, where liquor was served to patrons. A woman of about 30 years of age sat at the table. She was not homely, nor was she handsome. Her features were regular. Her hair and her eyes were brown, but her complexion had been bought at a drugstore. She wore makeup, and had been applied to her face in liquid form by a fire engine. Oh my! I should judge. She wore a waterproof, but we saw that beneath it was a blue satin skirt which reached on the woman's knees only, and that her dress waist was cut so low as to be absolutely of no value as a concealment of her buxom personality. Her limbs were encased in flesh-colored tights, and on her feet were white satin slippers. At many of the other tables sat other women, all dressed in the same manner, and they were performers of the dive. After singing or dancing on the stage, they were in the habit of occupying tables in the main hall. They were always an incentive for buying of drinks by people visiting the place, and they thus practiced their avocation, which was that of a common woman of the Bowery, more than that of a stage favorite. Of course, I invited the actress at our table to have a drink. "Brandy," said she, tersely, to a waiter who had mysteriously appeared. "3 brandies," I said. The doctor had drunk beer and whiskey up to this time, and I thought that I would introduce him to the Bowery cognac just for luck. Immediately after, 3 other fallen women hurried to our table to be in at the plucking of trio of victims. I surmised. I did not ask them to drink, but the waiter brought them more of the logwood called brandy we had drunk, and turned to me for payment. The stuff cost 25 cents a drink, an excessive price, of course, but I paid it without murmur. It was worth all the money to see the doctor dispose of it. The waiter attended to his businessman all the while. No sooner did one drink vanish than, absolute without orders, another round would be set in front of us and payment would be demanded. If I had refused to pay, I would have had a visit from the bouncer of the establishment, a fellow once a prize fighter whose business was to beat and eject any customer who refused to pay his highway robbery-like demand. The drinks came so fast that Dr. Parkhurst tried to throw the contents of the glass under the table in a furtive way, but I whispered to him that he would certainly get into trouble if he tried to do so, as there was nothing that so enraged a Bowery Dive bouncer as to see anyone throw away his liquor. You see, I did not want the doctor to lose any chance of experiencing how one feels after consuming a quantity of Bowery brandy, beer, and whiskey, because as long as the liquor was paid for, he really didn't care whether he bolted it or drank the stuff. While we were drinking, the girls at the various tables would one by one leave them and hurry back to the stage, where they would sing in strident tones a popular ballad and hurry back to make love at so much an affection to the men they thrust themselves upon. Coarseness was everywhere. The girls sat upon the laps of men and in no way rejected any advance, no matter how vile it was. Everybody smoked. The men puffed cigars while the girls sent out into the fetid air volumes of cigarette vapor. The doctor was almost suffocated by the smoke. He coughed, and his eyes got red, and he looked as if life was a burden. We refused all invitations liberally given us to make up a merry party in a house of ill fame around on Bayard Street, between the appearances on stage of the women, about an hour apart, and left the dive, as I wished to show Dr. Parkhurst a tight house in Bayard Street, a place where vice runs rampant, and nakedness is as common as oaths. At the tight house. We next dodged into the Tight House, as it's called, one of the most notorious resorts in the city. It is situated on the north side of Bayard Street, a few doors from the Bowery. Outwardly, it is a house of apparent respectability. It is a 3-story brick house with green blinds, and if it was not for the red shades over the front door transom, would attract no great attention. The fact, too, that bold-faced painted women hung out of the windows and chirped merrily as crickets to passers-by made the house belie its looks. We were ushered into a large, square room, where there was a set of cheap furniture. On the walls were several risque photographs of supposedly comic scenes in the life of a young girl, by one of those courageous situations which life constantly presents. Next to it, this photograph was a framed, illuminated text which bore the words, "God bless our home." The resort was a favorite one for the United States soldiers. There was a party of soldiers from Fort Hamilton there, and they were dancing with a bevy of girls dressed in tights, such as the fair page wears in the latest opera at the theater. I asked one of the girls why she wore such a costume. In case of fire, she replied, "There are no fire escapes on the house, and it won't take me long to dress." After I bought a round of beer for $1, we left the Tight House, which gets its name from the fleshings all its inmates must wear, and sneaked. That's Bayard Street for left the place, and went to a German house on Forsyth Street. The tenement house evil. These places are locally infamous. We passed into a little room about 10 by 15 feet in dimensions. At one side was a cigar counter, behind which was a woman. I planked down 15 cents for 3 cigars, and Dr. Parkhurst put his in his mouth and chewed it, while I made a bluff to light mine. And Irving calmly but firmly dropped his on the floor. The store was on ground floor, and above it was a towering tenement building swarming with the children of respectable parents. The contamination of cigar store could easily communicate to these little ones. "It's pretty cold out," said the woman who had sold us our cigars. "It is," replied the doctor. "Won't you step inside and smoke?" continued the speaker. "I don't mind," I said, as I led the way through the door and partitioned the rear. Inside was the same wretched story of vice. The woman introduced us to 5 girls, whom she described as her daughters. They were all twins, she insisted, and spoke 5 languages. They apologized for the scarcity of their clothing, making the remark that the running expenses of their household were so great that their mamma could not buy them better costumes. One young girl danced up to Irving and tried to get him to contribute to some charity fund, and was rewarded with 25 cents. "This is too disgusting," said Dr. Parkhurst aside, and so I led the way out, passing a child who was buying some tobacco for her father. She was a slip of a girl, 16 years of age or so. "She, too, may be drawn into this maelstrom of vice," remarked the doctor with melancholy smile. We then wended our way to the Bowery again, where we visited the well-known cheap restaurant of Beefsteak John. After we had tackled the lunch of oysters and pie, mince pie, too, which the doctor said he was very fond of, and if he had his way at home, would eat it at breakfast in New England style, we started for a glimpse of vice right within the shadow of the grim stone building that makes up police headquarters at number 300 Mulberry Street. Chapter 7. We found that vice had not escaped the 10th Police Precinct in the great city of New York when we reached the place, in the shadow of the police headquarters. This precinct is bounded by the south side of Hester Street, east side of of Broadway, south side of Bleecker Street, and the west side of the Bowery. We found that around police headquarters at that time, situated as it was in the northern end of the district, was the most vicious of the entire district. Vice there flaunted itself as it did in no other part of the precinct. In Bleecker Street, we were accosted by no less than 50 women strolling about the thoroughfare. If we had cared to do so, from the point from where most of these women accosted us, we could have thrown a stone clattering upon the steps of police headquarters, down which daily walk the police commissioners, the superintendent of police, the chief inspector of the detective bureau of the high officials. "I suppose," remarked Dr. Parkhurst, "that none of the police officers in yonder building know what is happening on this street." Then he laughed. I replied that their unfamiliarity with the map of New York City made it impossible for them to detect the exact conditions of affairs. The doctor at Olympic. We next dropped into Burns' Olympic Concert Garden at number 340 Bowery, where we had the same experiences as we had gone through in the Windsor Garden. On a stage at one end of the hall was a man who had a performing dog. Of course, there were women there. The poor lost women of the Bowery. They flocked to the table at which we had seated ourselves, and when I ordered drinks for all hands, poured the beastly liquid down their throats right merrily. Possibly they wished to stifle remorse, for I find that there may be remorse in the hearts, even the most abandoned. While we were drinking, one of the lady guests we were treating proposed that we go behind the stage and meet some of the performers. I gave Dr. Parkhurst the office. That's Bowery for a hint. And as he understood what I meant, he sat still with two of the women while I hurried back behind scenes, accompanied by the houri who had invited me, and who was, I then learned, one of the actresses in the place. Behind the scenes, several young, airily attired women. They were young by courtesy insisted on my blowing in some of the money I carried belonging to the Society for the Prevention of Crime. Well, I spent the necessary cash and was rewarded by an invitation to accompany my companion to Elizabeth Street. "What kind of place is that?" I asked. "It's a boarding house for most respectable policemen in the city," replied my acquaintance. Then she laughed. I thought that this was a good game, and so I rejoined the doctor and suggested that we pay a parochial visit to this new parish. He was not at all averse to the proposition. The Elizabeth Street place was filled with the degraded women that make the 10th Precinct haunt so utterly debased. I suppose that they were talking over the tariff or some other equally naughty subject, for they did not stop chatting away when we entered. I would simply relate one or two episodes, of course. There were the usual rounds of beer, whiskey, and cigars ordered and consumed by us. I hope that you will not think that all we did was drink, but I will tell you one thing, and that is that my wrists were beginning to be chafed. This was due to my constant reaching into my trouser pocket for money to keep the expedition going. But one of the crowning events of the visit to Elizabeth Street was the athletic attempts of one of the girls, a woman 35 years of age, evidently, who stood on her head and, while in this uncomfortable position, smoked a cigarette. She informed us that she had other acrobatic feats in her repertoire, and asked Dr. Parkhurst if he wanted to view them for $3. The doctor refused dryly, and we left the house. We next hurried over to Belker Street. I knew the man who kept the saloon, and knew that whether she was there or not, I should be able to show the doctor a sight or two that he had never seen before. When we went to the place, we saw something hardly ever seen out of London, namely, women drinking at a bar of the dive just like men. Of course, we had another round of drinks in this place, and when we issued forth and walked around into the 3rd Avenue, we decided, as we had such multitude of mixed drinks, to walk up to the doctor's home. I nearly always accompanied him after every expedition to his threshold. It may have been the sights we had seen, or it may have been the unaccustomed overloading of his inner man, but at all events the doctor was taken violently ill. I told him that a soda cocktail would help him very much, and then he amused me very much by asking what that drink was. "Never mind," I said, as I hurried my charges into the saloon at the corner of the 3rd Avenue and the 19th Street, and ordered the necessary drink. In the saloon was an elderly man who had been a fellow student at Amherst College with the doctor, who had been drinking heavily. He recognized the doctor. He insisted on talking of college days, and then introduced the bartender to the clergyman. "Good God! Are you Parkhurst?" shouted the saloon keeper. "Here, take your money. I'll have none of it." He had laid down a $1 bill of payment for our drinks, and the man turned round to his cash drawer, and as he grasped a handful of silver, he leaned forward with his eyes blazing with wrath. What the hell do you mean by coming in here?" he shouted. "I'll have none of your money. Take it back." You see, it was long after closing hours. Then he dashed a handful of silver in our faces, which he grabbed from the change tray behind the bar. During the silver shower which fell on us, I saw the doctor putting for the door. I followed him, but not before I had picked up about $1 in silver. The saloon keeper did not want the cash, evidently. If he did not, I could make it useful for prosecution of our work. When I got outside of the saloon, I looked around for the Dr. Parkhurst, but could not find him. He had disappeared utterly. I waited for him half an hour, but as he did not appear, I started for home. This missing of Doctor occasioned his writing to me under the date of March 8, when he said that it was funny how we missed each other that night. I suspected that after that silver shower, the Doctor ran all the way home. And that is where we end for the evening on Chapter 8. Join me next week. We are about halfway through this book. It's fun. It really is enjoyable. I think I'm enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying it. Make certain, again, to like and subscribe. And also, I have Patreon. You want to join me on Patreon. I am also, for those of you who are not familiar, I started teaching people publicly. So if you would like to learn magic and meditation and guidance, those things are available. Until next time, thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Love to you. Till next time. Bye-bye.